So I have no idea how this is actually going to go, but I am crossing my fingers that it's going to go well. A little while ago, God put on my heart that I wanted to kind of reach out in ways that I see other girls doing, and that's through these videos, like going through a book of the Bible, because I follow a lot of blogs and videos where some write and then some put up videos and go through scripture bit by bit, and I found that I actually learn more by watching those videos than sometimes I do when I'm reading a blog, because sometimes when you read, it's kind of just, you get in this mood where you just skip over it and you don't really read it, you just kind of skim. But with a video, you're more likely to actually kind of listen and zone into what's being said. So I wanted to give this a try, and I'm going to hope that I can actually stay on this and remember to record and do every part of this book. So the book that I'm going to start going through is the book of Ruth, and the reason being that is because whenever I was at my spiritual low point, I guess you would say, it was a really, really low point in my life, and I finally decided that I was going to do a Bible study. And the first Bible study that I did was the Kelly Minter Living Room series book on Ruth, and it blew me away. It could not have been more impactful on my faith and my journey with Christ. So I really hope that this book gives you as much as it gave me. So without further ado, we're going to hop into Ruth chapter 1. Okay, so starting in Ruth chapter 1 verse 1. In the days when the judges ruled, there was a famine in the land, and a man from Bethlehem in Judah, together with his wife and 2 sons, went to live for a while in the country of Moab. The man's name was Elimelech, his wife's name Naomi, and the names of his 2 sons were Mahlon and Chilion. They were Ephrathites from Bethlehem, Judah, and they went to Moab and lived there. Okay, so a couple of things from those couple of verses is, this is in the days when the judges ruled. So it was approximately about 450 years where the judges kind of ruled. And there was a famine in the land too, and you can read about more of the things that came about in the book of Judges. But this specific country of Moab was actually one of the designated countries where God told the Israelites to not have any kind of relationship with. And the reason being is where the country of Moab actually got its origin. And it tells the story in Genesis 19, and I'll read it to you. It says, Lot and his 2 daughters left Zor and settled in the mountains, for he was afraid to stay in Zor. He and his 2 daughters lived in a cave. One day the older daughter said to the younger, Our father is old and there is no man around here to lie with us, as is the custom all over the earth. Let's get our father to drink wine and then lie with him and preserve our family line through our father. So, long story short, the daughters actually end up sleeping with their father, and those sons born of the daughters end up being named Moab, which ends up being the father of the Moabites, and then the other son named Ben-Ammi, which is the father of the Ammonites. So this country was built off of an origin of incest, and God did not approve of that. So God told the Israelites specifically, do not have anything to do with this country. It's set apart. You are not to have anything to do with it. So starting again in verse 3, it says, Now Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. They married Moabite women, one named Orpah and the other Ruth. After they had lived there about 10 years, both Mahlon and Chilion also died, and Naomi was left without her 2 sons and her husband. Okay, so a lot happened in just a few little verses, but a lot of time has gone by. So when they got to Moab, not long after they got there, Naomi's husband died. Elimelech died, and she was left with her 2 sons. Well, the 2 sons did kind of the unspeakable and ended up marrying Moabite women. So in 1 Kings 11, 1 through 4, it tells of Solomon and his wives, because not only did God tell the Israelites not to have anything to do with Moab just because of how it got its origin, also you have to think about the fact that we're called to love people. We're called to love all people all over the world, but we are not to put ourselves in a situation to where we can get drugged down, because, and it'll explain more once I read this passage in 1 Kings, but it is much easier for a Christian to be pulled into the lower life of a non-Christian than it is for a non-Christian to be pulled on the upside. And that being is because sin is really, really powerful. We can get drugged into it so easily without even thinking about it. So kind of like the thing about this doesn't have to do with Christians getting drugged into non-Christian, but it kind of gives you an insight on how difficult it is. It's more likely for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than it is a rich man to get into heaven. So that's really, really difficult. So it's just giving you an example. And in 1 Kings 11, 1 through 4, it tells about King Solomon. It says in verse 1, King Solomon, however, loved many foreign women besides Pharaoh's daughter, Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites. They were from nations about which the Lord had told the Israelites, you must not intermarry with them, because they will surely turn your hearts after their gods. Nevertheless, Solomon held fast to them in love. He had 700 wives of royal birth and 300 concubines, and his wives led him astray. As Solomon grew old, his wives turned his heart after other gods, and his heart was not fully devoted to the Lord his God, as the heart of David his father had been. So ultimately, Solomon even got led astray from his wives, and the reason being is because the Lord told him, the Lord warned him ahead of time, like, listen, don't do this because you will be led astray, and he didn't listen. So that's kind of what happened here, is they did what they were not supposed to do. And in verse 5, after about 10 years, it says that Mahlon and Chilion actually died. So Naomi's left with nobody but her 2 daughters-in-law. So starting again in verse 6, when she heard in Moab that the Lord had come to the aid of his people by providing food for them, Naomi and her daughters-in-law prepared to return home from there. With her 2 daughters-in-law, she left the place where she had been living and set out on the road that would take them back to the land of Judah. Then Naomi said to her 2 daughters-in-law, go back, each of you, to your mother's home. May the Lord show kindness to you as you have shown to your dead and to me. May the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Okay, so that's a lot. And I have a lot of notes written down here in my Bible. All of this that's about to happen happened on the road. Like, ultimately, what just happened in our aspect of it, imagine if you were going on a trip with a couple of other people and you spent days preparing, because you have to prepare for a trip ahead of time. So you spent days preparing to go on this trip with these other people, and you got in the car, you started down the road, and after about 30 minutes or so, you turn around and tell them, hey, you don't have to go with me, just turn back around. Like, I don't know about you, but I would be kind of like, seriously? Like, all this planning and you're telling me basically to turn back around and go home. So Naomi told the 2 girls that because of their kindness to her sons and to her, that may the Lord show kindness to them. And this kindness is actually reverts to a word called hesed, and it's used a bunch of times in the Bible to explain how God's love is for us, because God's love is so great and is so unending that it was used in this passage to like extreme loyalty. So they had extreme loyalty to her and to her sons, and she is asking that the Lord show that same kind of kindness to them ultimately. And in verse 9, I didn't read all of it, I read kind of a little bit. It says, may the Lord grant that each of you will find rest in the home of another husband. Then she kissed them, and they wept aloud and said to her, we will go back with you to your people. But Naomi said, return home, my daughters. Why would you come with me? Am I going to have any more sons who could become your husbands? Return home, my daughters. I am too old to have another husband. Even if I thought there was still hope for me, even if I had a husband tonight and then gave birth to sons, would you wait until they grew up? Would you remain unmarried for them? No, my daughters. It is more bitter for me than for you, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. Okay, so they still had that loyalty for her. They still had that loyalty toward Naomi, and they told Naomi, I'm sorry, I'm getting a little tongue twisted, but Naomi told them, like, listen, go home. There's no reason for you to come with me. Just go ahead, go home. May the Lord bless you on your way. But they both told her, no, we're not going anywhere. We're staying with you. We're not leaving you alone. So she kind of in a way was thinking before they said that they would go back with her, Naomi was kind of thinking that their needs were above hers. Like, yes, I will be by myself, but I would rather you guys go and find husbands and stay with your family than to be taken from them and then come with me, because the Lord's hand has gone out against me. So I don't want you guys to be in the same situation that I am. But then once they said, okay, well, we'll go with you anyway, she kind of blew up a little bit, because she's like, listen, like, I'm too old to marry someone else. I'm not going to have any more kids. Even if I did, would you wait 18 years until they're men to marry them? No, because that's ridiculous. So in verse 14, something very big in the story happens. This is where the story kind of takes a turnaround. After Naomi blew up at them, in verse 14 it says, at this they wept again. Then Orpah kissed her mother-in-law goodbye, but Ruth clung to her. Okay, so this is the part where Orpah and Ruth start to weep in different directions. Like, Orpah still wept, but she wept away from Naomi. She ultimately said, okay, I understand, I'm going to miss you. Like, I'm going to miss you even though I'm going back home with my family. This is a separation for me, so I love you and I wish you well, but I'm going back home, I'm going to listen to you. But Ruth clung to her anyway. Ruth did not take that for an answer, and she still stayed and was still weeping because she didn't want to leave her. So in verse 15, it says, look, said Naomi, your sister-in-law is going back to her people and her gods. Go back with her. So Naomi still wasn't budging. Like, this was not like an option for her. She says, listen, I told you guys to go back, so go back. Like, listen to me. Why aren't you listening like your sister-in-law did? So it's possible, it said in my study book, that maybe she was telling them to go back to kind of cover up the fact that her sons had went against the law of God and married people from Moab, but it's not like confirmed or anything. But that's just, I thought that was kind of a fun fact, that might be why she was telling them to go back. But in verse 16, we finally hear from Ruth after now Naomi has told Ruth and Orpah to go home twice, and Ruth has still not listened. So Ruth got told 3 times, but Orpah got told twice and she left. So in verse 16, we hear from Ruth. But Ruth replied, don't urge me to leave you or to turn back from you. Where you go, I will go, and where you stay, I will stay. Your people will be my people, and your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there I will be buried. May the Lord deal with me, be it ever so severely, if anything but death separates you and me. Okay, so that's a lot. That is where Ruth ultimately showed that extreme loyalty, that hesed toward Naomi. Ruth told her, listen, I'm not going anywhere whether you like it or not. And actually, it was gracious. Like, listen, I appreciate what you're saying. Like, I appreciate that you want me to stay, but I'm not going anywhere. Don't tell me to turn back from you. I'm not turning your back. I'm not turning my back on you. So in verse 18, this is the last little bit for today. It says in verse 18, when Naomi realized that Ruth was determined to go with her, she stopped urging her. So after all this urging, after all this talking, Naomi finally stops and stands back and says, okay, you can go with me. So I feel like that relates to us in a way, because sometimes you can talk to someone, that word sounded weird. Sometimes you can talk to someone that you can talk to them calmly all day long and they hear you, but they're not really listening and taking into effect of what you're saying. So sometimes you need to have that you need to have that hard word to talk to some people, because sometimes just talking with them calmly and like, okay, let's talk about this, sometimes that's not enough. Sometimes we need that extra push. Sometimes we need that extra push to actually listen to what someone is trying to tell us. And that's what happens here, is that, Ruth clung to her, and Ruth didn't go anywhere for so long. But once Naomi said that last little bit, like, hey, your sister-in-law is going back, you need to go back with her, Ruth said, look, I'm not going anywhere, and you're just going to have to deal with it. So that is Ruth chapter 1 through 18. I really hope that you guys got a lot out of it. There's a lot more to come. The good part is about to come up where it actually dips into the story, the main story plot. And that's what we have to remember, is that everything in this Bible is applicable to life then and now. Because it's not called the living word for no reason. Like, it lives just as much today as it did back then. So I got a ton out of this book whenever I was going through a tough time, and I just really pray that all of you get as much out of it as I do, and I really hope that you enjoyed this video and that it was very helpful to you. Leave feedback somewhere on the video or in comments or something, because I would really like feedback of how this went. Yeah, I think that's all I wanted to say. And another thing, if you guys ever want me to kind of show you my pages and how I create my notes in my Bible, I actually follow a membership called thesoulscripts.com, and that's where I do kind of my private Bible study with myself. That's just my time between me and God. I don't do it in a big group. I just do it just me, the computer, the notebook, the Bible, and God. So if you're interested in how to kind of tie things together in your Bible and everything, I urge you to go check that out, and I will see you guys later. Bye.